In the world of Lisms, summer never visits and winter never leaves. The air bears only the coldness and the ground is always frozen. Humans have never been there, nor do they ever want to go there. They have only heard of the deep and wintry days of the Lisms world. My name is Edward, and this is the story of my family, who once fought the Lisms by themselves. It's been 30 years since then. My parents were looking for a tutor for me. One day, a graduate knocked on our door. My father asked him to walk in. He talked so nicely that it was clear to both sides after a short time that they were happy with each other. The tutor introduced himself as Lewis. Servants showed him to his room, and he set about his work with zeal, proving himself a scholar of the highest caliber. But something was strange about him. He liked to wander and usually returned in the middle of the night. If the door was shut, he never knocked, but instead appeared on the inside. This is something I told my father about. He was suspected of being a Lism, but because his intentions appeared to be benign, he was treated extremely well. He found out about my younger sister. He was always dropping hints, desirous of securing the match, which my father, on the other hand, invariably pretended not to understand. He went on vacation one day, and the next day a stranger called. He arrived on a black mule, which he tied at the front door. My father invited him to take a seat inside, and he accepted. The man was about 50 years old, his name was Jasper. He dressed neatly and cleanly, and had gentlemanly manners. When they were seated, the stranger began by saying that he had come with marriage proposals for Mr. Lewis. After some thought, my father responded that he and Mr. Lewis got along great as friends and that there was no point in bringing them closer together. Besides, father continued, my daughter is already engaged, and I beg you to please excuse me. Mr. Lewis is of a good family. I see no reason why you should have such an aversion to him, Mr. Jasper said, adding that he was quite certain the young lady was not engaged, and that he had inquired as to what the objection to the match might be. Well, then, father replied, I'll tell you what it is. We despise his species. Mr. Jasper became enraged, and my father also lost his temper. So they exchanged heated words and were on their way to blows when father ordered his servants to drive the stranger away. Mr. Jasper then walked away, leaving his mule behind. Father was certain that there would be an attempt at vengeance as a result of the angry words said, so he made all necessary preparations. The next day, a swarm of Lisms arrived, some on horseback, some on foot, some armed with spears, others with crossbows, men and horses tramping along with an unexplainable roar. Everyone was afraid to leave the house, and the Lisms threatened to set fire to it, which terrified everyone in the house, but just then, one of the bravest of them rushed forth with a number of the servants to attack the Lisms. Stones and arrows flew in all directions, injuring many on both sides. However, the Lisms eventually withdrew, leaving their blades on the field. These looked like frost or snow, but when picked up, they were just millet stalks. Is this all their cunning? Exclaimed their adversary, laughing, while making even more careful preparations in case the Lisms returned. The next day, they were making a decision together when a giant fell from the sky. He was over 10 feet tall and several feet wide, with a sword the width of half a door. But they attacked him so fiercely with arrows and stones that he was soon laid dead on the ground when they discovered he was made of grass. Men from our house began to laugh at Lisms, and because they hadn't seen them for 3 days, their precautions were relaxed. The Lisms, on the other hand, quickly re-emerged, armed with bows and arrows. They shot my father in the back and then fled when he summoned his servants and attacked them. When he drew the arrow from his back, he discovered it was a long thorn. The Lisms continued in this manner for about a month, coming and going and making it necessary to take precautions while causing no serious injury. This irritated everyone in the house, especially my father, until one day Mr. Lewis himself appeared, accompanied by a troop of soldiers. Father went out to meet him right away. Mr. Lewis withdrew among his men, but Father summoned him and asked him what he had done that soldiers should be brought against his family. The Lisms were about to fire their arrows when Mr. Lewis stopped them, and he and my father shook hands. Father invited him to enter his former room. "You, Mr. Lewis, are a man of intelligence, and I trust you will make allowances for me," Father said as wine was served. "Friends as we were, I would have been delighted to connect with you, but your carriages, horses, houses, and so on are not those of ordinary mortals, and even if my daughter had agreed, you must know the thing would have been impossible. She is still a great deal too young. It's of no consequence, we can still be friends as before, and if you do not despise us, earthly creatures, there is my son whom you have taught. He is 15 years old, and I should be proud to see him connected with you if such an arrangement should be feasible," Father continued. "I have a daughter 1 year younger than your son. She is neither ugly nor stupid," Mr. Lewis exclaimed. "How would she do?" Father stood up and made a low bow, which Mr. Lewis promptly returned, and they became the best of friends, forgetting everything about the previous unpleasantness. Mr. Lewis's people were given wine, and everyone was pleased. There was no more trouble after that, and a year passed without any news of Mr. Lewis, as if he wished to back out of his agreement. Our family, however, continued to wait, and Mr. Lewis reappeared 6 months later, when, after a few general remarks, he declared that his daughter was ready, and requested that an auspicious day be set for her to come to her husband's home. The young lady arrived after this had been arranged. She was unusually polite to her father and mother-in-law, and the former was overjoyed with the match. Her father and the younger brother of his had escorted her to the house, and they sat drinking until daybreak, conversing in a most refined manner. My wife could predict whether the harvest would be good or bad, and her advice was always followed in such matters. Mr. Lewis and his brother, as well as their mother, paid frequent visits to her in her new home and were thus frequently seen by the public.